All right, it is Monday night, and here at Green Oaks Gaming, that means that we're on a journey to explore game worlds, look at world building, really making something of the game environments that we're putting our players into, and having a good opportunity to make our own worlds distinctive, unique, fantastical, but also very ready for good character immersion into. So my name is Joe here at Green Oaks Gaming, and the videos so far have been leading up to and working and developing on a new campaign that is getting ready to be put in front of my own players, one of my own player groups. And the area is kind of funky, the setting is kind of funky, the premise is kind of funky. So this is designed for players level 10 through 15, so they'll just get into 16th by the end of this short campaign. So it's a higher tiered and not a real starting area, but because I want to differentiate and allow for new characters to come in, characters that they have been playing, to be able to kind of revisit and have a kind of fresh aspect and fresh start. So we're moving our campaign from, as you're seeing on the big screen here, from Espar, where I have been doing the majority of my gaming, down to Deutschland, and actually just the northern aspect. So we're not even going to explore the rest of it. Now, this is an area that I have not used in games since 3rd edition. And so it's been a long time since I've used this area. And with the changing of editions, I also changed the ages in my game world so that I can kind of start fresh. So each time the age changes, there are big, huge disruptions, and it allows me to kind of wipe the slate clean, still have tools that I pulled or used previously that I can use as kind of historical base, I suppose, maybe, legend and lore, as well as some of the locations, so I'm not having to reinvent the wheel each and every time, which it hasn't been a lot. We're only in 5th edition. I've only done this 4 times, but it allows me to continue to use things that I've done before, places that I've explored, places that I've penciled out. Lets me revisit those areas with a fresh set of characters, fresh set of players generally, because I move around a lot, and of course fresh aspects to the gaming mechanics. So whatever I've done before is a good basis in history and lore, and I can revisit it pretty easily. But because this area has not been visited a long time, we've gone through and done a lot already. Looking at what makes up the land, how did it come to be? We know that the area used to be a volcano that exploded, and so it's all sloped and rocky and mountainous. We have gone through and made just a couple of updates to our area map, which is upside down. Sorry about that. And to really look at how we can bring the elements of this story into 5th edition. So where are we going to start? What areas are we going to explore? And how am I going to weave the backbone of my story and the ribs that I'm laying down, the story aspects of the campaign, into a playable area and format for my characters to explore? Again, this is a little more challenging because it's 10th to 15th level, or through 15th level. Things are going to be a little more elevated that the characters are going to come across. But also because it's a short campaign, it's not going to be as sandbox. It's not going to be as open. Well, I'm not going to completely keep them on the rails. The story has progressive points that will go through regardless if they take the adventures laid out in front of them or not. It will impact their story and their character stories in this game world. So just to recap, the characters are going to get called to Greystone to help solve a problem secretly. They're going to be known as the Griffin's Talons. So the characters can come from different locations, different backgrounds, different areas, different upbringings. The requirement will be that it is a good campaign. I need the characters to be good. When they get to Greystone, they will be asked to explore the Citadel, which is a ways away, but nearby enough that it's not going to be, we're not going to have huge amounts of wilderness trek. The people in the area, especially the military, will use hippogriffins to maneuver around many of the mountain passes. So I don't have to worry about travel or anything like that. There'll be allotted travel. We won't have to dive into that very deep, I'm hoping. Unless the characters want it, then we will go into that realm. When they get to the Citadel, they'll have to go in, and that's going to be a dungeon delving exercise where they'll have to go in and clear the Citadel from the monsters that are inhabiting it. Hopefully they're taking on the clues, the breadcrumbs that I'm going to leave down there, which are going to lead them in two directions. Well, three directions, kind of. The first direction is to the south, where there is a focus on pain and suffering. There are records that a priest of Marduk, which is the generally recognized god of the realm, of the region, of this continent, of this area, had sent the sarcophagus from. So all of the records indicate that the sarcophagus came from the north. However, the sarcophagus itself is going to have clues that it came from the north. And the aspects of it is the political parties were pushing for the military to unseal this sarcophagus, thereby releasing the evil. So we've got three threads that we can put down. Who's going to dig into the politics of it? What nobles are kind of pulling the strings? Why is there a priest at a temple of Marduk who is forging documents? And what happened up north to disguise this sarcophagus? Because we know it actually did come from the north. So we've explored the northern expanse, where they're going to go to Blue Harbor and the Clay Marshes. We know that they are going to have an encounter there. There is going to be an adventure in the marshes, in the clay mines below and in Blue Harbor. They're going to come up against one of the avatars of our big bad villain, hopefully defeat that big bad villain, and then be left with the other two paths that they could take. And again, one of them should lead them to the south, where we will have a temple and an amphitheater that, as they explore and start to dive in, they are seeing that there is a cult who is in progress, who is kind of secretly worshiping Loviatar. And they could go into the political atmosphere to see that the politics of the recently deceased monarch are orchestrating some of these changes. So all three of the aspects are tied together with the same people, but it's just a matter of what will the adventures be leading to that. So we've explored the northern aspect pretty deep. We've explored a little bit of the religious aspect to the south, where the cult is worshiping. Really looking at the northern aspect of it, though, we did a lot of digging on that on the last stream. So just going over my notes here, I want to check and see what do we want to cover next. Let's get excuse me, my notes here. and just check and see. Now, we did cover a lot of the aspect around the clay mines. One thing we didn't talk about was further in the north, we're going to have more aspects that we want to dive into, especially focused on plague and disease. So with the kind of leave off from Blue Harbor, we want them to go and ultimately be able to kind of dive into what is causing the plague and disease. So in our notes, some of the things we talked about was where the fields that have been plowed and sown but not managed, people are sick and needing, they're begging for relief. The area feels overrun with insects, toads, frogs, different types of plague aspects of it. Very similar to what we had around Blue Harbor. But this one here, we want to focus more in on the Temple of Talona, which is in the aqueduct in a transfer station. So for that aspect, we have to think back to who set up and is organizing the stuff in Blue Harbor. Well, that is the same party who is controlling the northeastern area of the continent. And we have this city here. You can see it's by the lake, lots of rivers before it goes down into the water. That seems like a great area for water to start being managed, maintained, and a great location for our aqueduct transfer system, especially as we've got this massive amount of fresh water prior to it going out to the sea. So we could look at how aqueducts are moving along the coast on both the northern and eastern aspects. That location there is going to be a great seat for our Duke. That is where he is working out of, and that is where we want to have our Temple of Talona. At that kind of upper edge, after they've already focused on defeating the first avatar of Baal, and now they need to confront, and not in this order, of course, but now they need to confront the Temple of Talona, who is serving Baal. And many of the clues out of Blue Harbor are going to lead directly to this Duke, who is kind of pulling the strings, set up that avatar at Baal, is really working towards spreading death and disease on behalf of Talona, who is actually working on behalf of Baal. So the aqueduct system is what we're going to want to focus on next, and that's an important aspect because we're tying in again nobility, where we've already established their costume, kind of how they look, how they think, how they interact with each other, with religions, with politics, with military, with each other. We know their kind of seat in Greystone, but when we get to this location, this is where the Duke kind of rules his area, right? That northeastern area. He's ruling from this seat of power. And you can see on the map there is no name there. Now, oftentimes I'll pop things on the map and then I actually won't name them, or if I do, I write it in pencil. That way I can adjust and change it if I need to. So just off the top of my head, I want to think about this area a little bit. Again, I want to differentiate it from Blue Harbor and the clay mines. So where we talked more about that earthiness, this one here, because it's on this lake and in this little bit of stretched path between these rivers, it almost makes me think more like a plateau. You see the mountain ranges coming in these areas here. What if this area here is all kind of higher level than your coast? So think, the mountains of California and Washington and Oregon, kind of that kind of coast where you've got a very low coastline and then mountains that just jut up, and beyond the mountains is much higher kind of plains. So that would be a good reason to have aqueduct systems come through to get the water more northern and eastern beyond the mountains from this location. And you've got gravity working for you. So this location could be still high above the coastline proper, making it very difficult for ships to get up here. So they're a little more rural. They're not quite as connected to the sea because we've got these massive waterfalls on these separated lands. That gives us a good opportunity to make sure that we keep this more removed from easy access. So those type of aspects really can drive home the fact that this area, even though it's large and in scope and scale and size, and this is where a duke rules from, it's very removed from easy traffic. So we can start putting in some of those elements of more rural, hard to access, separated out, and easier for that duke to maintain his fist upon the people, especially when it comes to something like water, where a lot of those areas to the north and to the east and southeast along the coastline anyhow, you're going to have salt water and not much else. Even though you could have springs and rivers coming off of the mountains, which you should for winter glacier melt and snow melt and things like that. It could be super seasonal. So controlling water is a great aspect of it. So as we think about, I'm going to put up top here the northeastern and eastern shoreline. And then for that location, for the dukes, and I'm just going to put in parentheses city, we know it's going to be highly elevated. So let's call it on a, let's see, what is an aspect of being on the east? We know the sun rises to the east. So Morning Bluff. Morning Bluffs. Morning Bluffs. I think that could be a decent name for the city. We'll put it in parentheses, not finalized yet. Maybe it doesn't make much sense, but Morning Bluffs sounds light, easy, manageable. It sounds more welcoming, and it could be because they're trying to get more people there, that they've picked a more friendly nomenclature to make it sound nice and easy. But again, I want it to be removed. I want it to be very isolated. I want it to be more dangerous. And that's why the Duke is able to maintain this aspect of Talona without much interference because it's a more isolated area. So we've already got good aspects as far as geography. We need to think higher elevation. We need to think, what's around it. There is a massive lake, large rivers, and then shorelines and mountains. So we've got a lot of aspects that we can play with in-game. Now the biggest one here is we know that the Temple of Talona is in location here. We know that there is going to be big aqueducts moving from the lake and the rivers out into the coast. So we have to have stonework, right? Someone's got to build the aqueducts. So stoneworks, engineering, planning. Maybe they've already been here from the Third Age or the Fourth Age, and they've just kind of renewed use in them. It's an aspect, if we don't want to go into, are the people of Morning Bluffs the ones who put that in place? Are they just maintaining it? Are the people there really focused more on farming and fishing, that kind of aspect? Those are some questions we have to ask before we can get our characters there, because we want to have the location really grounded so that as the characters go and explore, we already know who the people are, what they do, where they get their livelihood, and how this sickness and the the plagues are affecting them. What impact is it having on the people, the community, and the area at large? So we could have aspects of the people being very adept at stonework and engineering and planning. That to me screams dwarves and gnomes. Do we want to go that direction? We do have mountains and everything's here, and oftentimes your dwarves especially are mining for ores and jewels and gems, things like that. I do want to avoid that. We've got this massive lake. I don't see dwarves as, loving to swim and fish. They're more apt at the mining aspect, in my opinion, generally for my game world. Now, we could throw that on its head, but that's starting to eliminate a lot of the aspects of dwarves, again, in my opinion. So I'm going to kind of pop down here. Gnomes are pretty populated in this area, and for generations they're the ones who did the stonework aqueducts and the engineering and the planning and the execution of it, and because of them now the coastlines have that water flowing. So gnomes are going to be an important aspect of this city. Because the city is located and centered around these massive aqueduct systems, water is definitely going to be important. So that brings me into water management, fishing, gathering like seaweeds and kelps, living off of the water, fishing, netting, maybe even school fishery. So as I'm thinking about this and how to incorporate things, what aspects are going to be affected by the people suffering a plague? Now again, these are going to be more isolated and kind of salt of the earth type of people, so we can go right back into their clothing, and everything is going to match very similar to what we established in the Clay Marsh and the Blue Harbor area, but we've got to adapt it now. So instead of the kind of muck dwellers attire, what would people in and around the water aspect be using? They'll be wearing slickers, lots of things that are wool, right? Because wool, even though it absorbs a lot of moisture, it dries fast, or it can dry fast, and it keeps insulated when it's wet. So it's still warming even when it's wet. So wool could be an important aspect of their attire. They could have much better looms and everything, so maybe fabrics. That brings us into the wool and the fabrics, lots of sheep, maybe like llamas and other type of wool producing creatures and animals that they're having to manage and maintain, which is another reason they need the aqueduct systems, to make sure that there are watering holes for these locations. And again, a lot of this goes pretty deep. While you don't always have to get as deep, because I want to continue using this area here, the deeper I go now, the more opportunity I have to use this going forward, and longer times. My initial goal is, after this aspect, I want to start a campaign at level 1 and run them 1 through at least 17 in this same location. So the pre-work I'm doing now is going to go for multi-games. It's not going to just be this one session. So I do want to spend some time on it. I want it to be deep. So we know that the primary populace is going to be peopled with gnomes. They're going to be fantastic at stonework and engineering, planning, maintaining aqueduct systems. We know for the community it's going to be important to have fishing and gathering of things like kelps and seaweeds. They're going to be having different types of school fisheries. They're going to be wearing garb that's also very utilitarian, like the other areas, but a lot of oiled leathers and wool. That way they are more waterproof and insulated from the cold along the water. Now, thinking about the city itself, we know that it has to house the Duke. Now, what kind of a Duke is going to move into a gnome populated area and not have some type of a more comfortable thing, especially since the Duke, we know, is going to be a half-elf. I think we've established that a long time ago. If not, maybe a surprise, but the Duke is a half-elf. The Duke has to have a comfortable area. And again, he's ruling from this area. So there's definitely family money there, and he will build an estate. And like any Duke who's got a more scenic area, this is up in the bluffs, high above the coastline, between these two massive rivers, overlooking a lake. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. It's going to be comfortable. And it is also going to be well guarded. So the Duke is going to be an important aspect of this. This is one of the NPCs who is initially going to be bringing the characters into the story. How the characters are going to interact with the Duke, I mean, it's hard to say. Are they going to go after the Duke? Are they going to partner with the Duke? It's just hard to say. So I have to start thinking about, for this location, when the characters come, what are possibilities that they're going to want to do and want to engage in. The Duke ties back into the nobility, so it's possible they'll want to deal with the Duke on his own turf while they're in this location. Again, we've got aspects from the clay mines that are going to lead them in this location. Maybe not immediately afterwards, but at some point. We also know the aqueduct. What did we call it? The aqueduct transfer station is going to be the actual site of our adventure. And that's going to be an important aspect. Now, as the PCs move into this location, we also do have to have an inn and tavern, as well as stables, because they will be on hippogriffins. So they'll have to have a place to put their mounts. And in case they're not wanting to engage with the Duke and try to push that they need to also stay in a more comfortable location, we want to have that inn as well as a tavern. So we've got our big locations that I want to plan out and map out. And for that, I always try to have a little bit of graph paper, maybe, ready to go. So I know the camera angle here is a little challenging and the lighting isn't perfect, but let's see if we can't capture some of this in a good way. So for this adventure, the aqueduct system, I am just going to pencil in a rough idea of what am I looking for in my aqueduct system. I know I've got two massive rivers on either side, and I know I've got a lake. And all of these should merge and have some type of a central conversion point. And then from there, we're going to go off in small ways to the city, and then off and split to the coasts. So we know we're going to have aqueduct systems coming in from the rivers, from the lake, and then serving the city before going out to the two coasts. Super, super simple. What I want to do now is complicate this, because if I don't complicate it, if I keep it too simple, it's not going to be as interesting. And I want this aqueduct transfer system to be the point of an adventure. And with this, I want to put hazards, I want to put challenges, and I want to put an opportunity for encounters, meaningful encounters, to happen in this location. So I am going to switch pencils here, and I'm going to dark box that kind of joint point. And that's serving the cities before going out to the coasts. And then I also want to box in this location here before it splits and branches out to the coasts. Now I want both of those to be larger encounter areas. The biggest one I want to be the center area. That's where the actual temple of Talona is going to be. That's where poisons and plagues are being placed into the water. It's still affecting your city water. And then I want more to be put out in the coast, tributaries. So we know already we've got two areas where we can have locations of encounters. This one here being the most important. But beyond that, now I want to start thinking of how can I make this a worthy adventure where I'm going to have an average of 6 encounters for my players. I want 6 encounters on average, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the level of difficulty, but on average I want 6. So to make this a little more challenging, I'm just going to mark 5 more areas, which will give me 7 total, counting my primary. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I've got a total of 7 areas indicated on my rough drawn map. The reason I want to have 7 is, again, I can flex these up and down based on the challenge rating of my party. But I don't want them all spread out. I want them stacked up. So my map, in actuality, I want to look at multi-levels. So aside, I'm going to put just a rough rectangle here and think about each of these individually. And again, this is just how I go through and start designing my adventure locations. You don't have to follow this process. There's lots of good tutorials and everything. Your own creativity is fantastic. I want to hear it. I love hearing about different people, the way they put things together. This is just my process. I'm hoping it helps inspire you to share yours or to try something different. So I've got my locations kind of squared away here. I've got just what I anticipate the building being, right? Now I have to think of how can I have these interact with each other as a whole. So my first thought is on this one here is going to be kind of the exit point for your stacked aqueducts. From this location here, you're going to have 2 aqueducts going 2 different directions that'll start going downhill. So this interior part right here, right before it leaves, should have some type of an encounterable area. So I'm going to put down just a couple of things of what could that do. It could have a open and close. It could have a divert. It could have so this is kind of a final control. Now for my from the lake, we can have kind of the same thing. On this back area, we can have an area that manages lake water, where they're pulling out kelp and seaweed, fish, etc. This could be an area where there are also controls and checks. So we're already bringing in elements where we can have some fantastic water encounters in here. Maybe it's a large pool that has controls allowing the waters to rise and lower based on how much you're letting in into this primary collection area. So you could build out some fantastic water encounters in this high bluff area. And then likewise, from my rivers, we also want to have these have opportunities to interact. So we're starting to connect these encounter areas and map out a location. Now there could, as we fine tune it, we could do hallways, we could do different things. These could actually be higher up than the lake. There's lots of different things we could do to, to have these be separate levels. Perhaps this area here, this lake area, is the entire third on the first layer, and these 2 areas are each half of that above it. So lots of different areas. So this one here, for this river, which in our map is going to be more to the south, could be very different type of water coming out from the lake than up here. So maybe in this area here, let's see, we've got a lot more mountains and everything. It's closer anyhow to the mountains. You've got a big flow into it just to the south of it from mountains. So maybe this one here is going to be, let's look at, I'm just going to call it rocky mineral. And then this one to the other side, we've got a lot more flat land or bluffy land. This, it isn't mountainous anyhow. We know it's higher up than this area here, but this area here is going to be a lot more, it's further away from the water coming in, and this water coming in here is kind of from this basin. So let's call this one silt and dirt. I'm already getting an elementally feel to this. As I'm thinking about the Temple of Tolona, focused on sickness and plague and just overall misery and death, I'm thinking how we're already so dialed into elements here. And I think it could be a great aspect for us to play off the elements. So we know we've got plenty of focus already on water, but rocky, silty. So we've got that earth, water. Now 2 elements that we're missing. Maybe we need to have the boiling chamber. We're introducing fire. We're making sure that the water, once it's collected and decided which area is going to have us the most feed, we're going to need to boil that water and make sure it's pasteurized and boiled and clean, free of any disease, right? Free of any disease. So I want to have a boiling chamber. Now I want that to be possibly before this joint spot. And I'll tell you why. Because if they're poisoning in the boiling chamber, you're not doing yourself very good, on poisoning stuff that you're boiling. Or you're having to wait until after you boil to poison. So my thought is, as this is boiling, this water is being boiled, it's constantly bubbling, it's hot, it's humid, dangerous. There are pipes that collect all the steam in air, right? So we're now introducing air aspects. Look at that, those elements are just coming right to us. And then collecting into our joint spot. So this will be the collection chamber. And this is where poisons are being added. Diseases and microbes and viruses are being added as all of these pipes that are coming from this boiling chamber are bringing the water, the now cleaned water, together. And that's where we want to have our biggest confrontation. But because it's our biggest confrontation, we don't want it to be first. No, 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 no. So we want to have our collection chamber feed into the city water. Right? Because we know we want to have aspects of city encounter. Whew, I know it was a long journey. I know it's been kind of challenging following along. My mind goes a mile a minute. I hope you're able to follow along. But here we have just already a rough map of a location that makes sense to the region and the people of the region and allows us to build an area around these types of encounters, tying in elements of sickness as well as introduce elements of elements. Sometimes it gets crazy. So our aqueduct transfer station, we know we're going to have piping, pools, what do we call those aqueducts? I guess more types of pipes, I suppose. Aqueducts, tracks, a river, etc. So I'm already getting a vision in my mind of a multi-story aqueduct system. Now this is built by gnomes, or at least managed by gnomes now. I don't want it to be exclusive to gnomes though. So I'm thinking in here we want to have the aqueducts with that transfer station where we know we were going to have elements, some type of an encounter element coming out. I want that to be elevated up. So the doorway in is going to be on the first floor. And on that first floor, I'm going to separate these out a little bit. I'm going to have 3 floors. This is going to be fancy with archways, an extremely fancy building with gargoyles and statues, maybe large massive statues on the sides. These will be figures holding these massive vases. Maybe those are in the all now the faces are scratched out because this was the previous PCs who usurped the area in 3rd edition. So now this is kind of viewed as not the best place. So the faces are all scratched out, broken down, but it's these figures holding these large urns of water pouring down. So decorative sides. We know it's going to be all stone. It's going to have a fancy element to it, but it's also going to be aged and dated. The gnomes maintain it, but they were forced to build it by the 3rd edition PCs who usurped the continent. But they kept everything working. They just scratched out the faces. So on the first floor, that's where we can encounter the city-fed water systems. And I think what we'll do is just have that front hallway separate 2 large pools, almost like cisterns. And then some type of a stairway in the back. So this is city cistern 1 and 2, and then a stair. And that stair gets us up to the level 2. And the level 2 is where we'll have the, so let me tell how crazy I get here sometimes. So level 2, when they come up the stairs, we'll put this as level 2. We know they're going to come up the stairs at the back of the building. And we know that we want to have the lake separator. So again, we're going to have some type of an aspect of a bridge and then lake separator. Where there's a possible encounter in this area here. We know on this aspect there's going to be machinery. And then on, let's see, I don't want to put that center boiler yet. Yeah, maybe I do. Maybe I do. But we'll have it all enclosed. They can't access that area. Again, because I want them to get there kind of last, or close to last, because that's where I want them to have to really dig in the Temple of Telona element. I want the rest of this to be less apparent that anything is going wrong, unless they take tests of the water or something along those lines, purify. But ultimately, I want that to be kind of a last aspect. What I do want them to do is we will have the no, actually we can have them access the boiler, because that is not where the collection chamber is. So the boiler, maybe we'll just split this half and half. Boiler to the front, and then the lake separator to the rear. That's a lot of water, but we will put some elements for them to stand. So we've already got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then level 3, we are going to have, we know from the boiler, from this front half, this is where the collection is. Our stairs again to the back. We know that we want to have the 2 lake aspects. So this is going to be our silt. This is going to be our rock, river, and river. So we know the lake or the river waters will be collected here and then pipe through down to the boiler. We know this will all pipe here. From the boiler, everything is going to come up to the, we'll call this the steamer, into the collection area, which is where the villain of this aspect is going to go. And then from there, then it's going to pipe out, which means this aqueduct actually moves up to the 3rd floor. That's where our exit is. And from there, that also trickles down in to fill our cisterns. But the pipes, maybe, the pipes clean some. So the people of the city aren't going to be quite as sick as some of the coastal people. But who knows, maybe they will be. So the temple, this is, again, just rough, of Telona. We've built it out. We know already what kind of aspect it's going to be, what kind of building it's going to be. Areas that make sense to the building, to the purpose of the building, to the people of the building, and how we can organize it to make a great opportunity for characters to have to kind of dungeon delve into it. Even though they're going up in level, you ultimately are delving into it, starting from the 1st floor, working up to the 3rd, where you'll confront this area's villainous character in that collection as they are poisoning the water that's going to down the pipes to the city cistern, as well as out into the aqueducts. So just like that, we've roughed in an adventure location and tied it into the story. Our aqueduct aspect is already now done. So I'm going to pop this on the camera here. Again, it's rough, it's messy, it's ugly, but this is my process on how I really dive into my adventure building, my location building, and how I try to tie things together and make it very unique and different. I want it to be realistic enough for good immersion and a good opportunity for me to have it to where if my characters decide they want to go and explore aspects of it, I don't have to just come up with things that may not mesh together or shoot from the hip, anything like that. I've got enough here that I'm able to build upon what I put down. So in here, again, I'm going to keep this in pencil on my notes. So we've already called out how stonework is going to be important. So some of the things I want to do for the city, it's going to be primarily built of stone, which explains why it was able to stay in place and have things like the aqueduct still stable after the change through 2 ages, because of that great gnome engineering in stonework. And this is all going to be light colored stone. So in the other aspect where we had lots of reds and browns, this one I want to be a lot more tans and light browns. White, tan, light brown, because I want to make sure it's very different from the other. So this is all going to be more sandstone-ish, but strong like granite. They're going to use stone tile roof. This also talks a lot about things like fire. As you're thinking about cities that are built of stone, there is not much worry about things, falling to ruin because of fire. So there's never really any aspect where things like fireball are going to level the city or anything like that, as they're having these confrontations. These are some things to think about, how are some of the actions going to impact some of the story elements. So I do like sticking with the stonework here, especially as we're thinking about disease elements, things like that as you think about, how to purge sicknesses and diseases and everything. Heat is definitely going to be important, but fire is not going to be a concern to destruction. So circling that back in, our inn, our tavern, our stables, all of them are going to be from stone. The aqueduct transfer station, stone, but old. Still well maintained though. All of these locations are also going to have old foundations, newer uppers, right? They spruced it up a bit when the Duke came in. He wanted things bigger, shinier, newer, new construction, things like that. So while the foundations and lower parts of all of the buildings, which are designed around gnomes, have this kind of fresher, newer upper element to them. Now the Duke's estate, we know it's going to be beautiful, comfortable, and well guarded. I also think it's going to have a combo of the white stone and some more, let's say, exotic materials of, I'm just going to throw a color out here, of green copper. So that patinaed copper, that's something that he's bringing in and is an element that really distinguishes he is the lord of the area. He is bringing in these fancy copper ceiling tiles and domes on the estate. So that will be the standout point. And when you think about this kind of green, shiny, coppery bits on top of this whiter stonework and this light gray stonework, it really sets that aspect apart. Now we do have things like white stone repeated in here. I count it 3 times. Do we change the name from Morning Bluffs to White Stone or something similar? Now we easily could, but white stone gets a lot of use in fantasy genre, so I'm actually going to keep it Morning Bluffs, and I'm going to keep it that way and actually mark it on the map. This is going to be, and again in pencil, Morning Bluffs. Now, Morning Bluffs is going to be the site of an adventure. We know we're going to have the Temple of Telona being the aqueduct transfer station. We've built out that aqueduct. We know the shape, the size, the colors, some of the aspects of the building. Now all we have to do for this adventure is populate it. And just that construction part, thinking about the area and how it serves its broader community, who sits there, we've already explored a heck of a journey in adventure, location, and world building. So I'm going to make myself a note here. Next week, let's flesh out the aqueduct. We're going to populate it, and we're going to give it a better GM map. So, as we come to the close of this week's journey, we've got a plan on what we're going to do next week. We've covered a lot of ground already. I'm really excited to look at how we incorporate some of those elemental aspects, as well as what we look at for building the adventure that's going to challenge our characters at that high level in such a small, tight location. Some things like that can be tricky. So we're going to tackle that next week and really look at fleshing out this adventure location further than we have on the other adventure locations we've started so far. Just so I can continue this creative process and show you how I take it from this type of concept to what I present at the table and how I present it. So until next week, I hope you have a fantastic week. I hope that this was enjoyable, informative, enlightening, inspiring, but ultimately something that you can utilize in some way, shape, or form as you gather players around your table and continue to journey into unexpected, fantastical worlds that we all enjoy in our community. Thank you and have a great night.